if we may, individuals and peoples who have lost their lives and paid the ultimate price because of genocide. And that's genocide of the Tamils. That will be the focus today, but also the Indigenous communities around the world. And as we hear, I'm a native of Canada, and I know that we occupy we occupy Indigenous lands there, and don't know the deep history here, but I want to make sure that we do take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous communities around the world who have been colonized and been victim to genocide around the world. And on that point, if we may, I'd like to start with a moment of silence for all those who have lost their lives in the fight for freedom and justice around the world, and especially the Tamils.
இனப்படுகொலையால் கொல்லப்பட்ட அனைவருக்காகவும் எழுந்து நின்று மௌன அஞ்சலி செலுத்துவோம்.
Thank you. Nandri. Merci. So welcome and good morning, everybody, to this side event. During the 2005 United Nations World Summit, heads of states and governments accepted the responsibility of every state to protect its population from 4 crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing. And all 4 of these crimes have been committed against the Tamils in Sri Lanka by the successive Sri Lankan Sinhala governments. Victims, survivors, and their relatives are still waiting for justice and accountability. And we urge the international community to take actions for the necessary reforms in Sri Lanka's criminal judiciary to prevent future such events and redress the war crimes, enforced disappearances, ongoing violations of Tamils human rights, and the Tamil genocide. And we urge the United Nations to refer Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court. That was the blurb that was on the flyer, and I took a moment to read it, and I welcome everybody who's joined us from seeing that. We'll start our day this morning with our panelists. The plan for this morning is to have our panelists make short-ish presentations, and then we will open the floor for questions and ideally an interactive dialogue if possible. On the panel, I will introduce each panel member as they're about to speak. We'll start with Ketpana Nagendra, who is the Secretary and Spokesperson from Tamil Rights Group. And Ketpana will be starting with a brief history.
Thank you, everyone. The end of the war in 2009 in Sri Lanka was not a simple cessation of hostilities. There have been 60,000 to 100,000 enforced disappearances, 40,000 to 70,000 killed in the final phase of the war, 146,000 unaccounted for, 300,000 Tamils displaced internally, 34,000 acres of occupied land, and a 1-to-6 ratio of military personnel to civilians. 13 years since the massacre in Mullawaikal, we have yet to see any resemblance of accountability or justice. The Sri Lankan government has shown no interest in domestically bringing to justice those responsible. In fact, they have done nothing but protect such individuals. Numerous resolutions passed at the United Nations has also failed to hold the perpetrators accountable. The massacre in 2009 was not the beginning of the genocide against the Tamil people. The onset of the genocide can be traced back to 1948, right after the independence of Sri Lanka. The first constitution made Sri Lanka a unitary, centralized state that negatively impacted the Tamil people. Then, in 1956, with the Sinhala Only Act, Sinhalese was declared the only official language. At the same time the law was passed, Tamil MPs staged a peaceful protest and were beaten. This was a key event in the history of violence against Tamils. 1958, a second anti-Tamil pogrom in which Tamil civilians were attacked, murdered, and raped by Sinhala mobs. Then again, in 1977, the third anti-Tamil program with widespread killings. In 1981, the fourth anti-Tamil program and the burning of the Jaffna Public Library. and yet again in 1983, the Black July program. 52 massacred Tamil political prisoners, 3,000 Tamils killed, 150,000 displaced within the country. At this time, I was a 3-year-old child living in Colombo with my mother and sister. Our family home was burned and looted, and we fled into a neighbor's backyard for a few nights until we could find safe passage on a boat to the northern part of the island. My childhood memories in Sri Lanka are non-existent, but that particular afternoon in July and the days leading to our travel to Jaffna is forever etched in my mind. Fast forward to 2022. Many of the issues facing the Tamil community still exist. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution is seen as one of the main reasons for the shift in the dynamics of the democratic society in Sri Lanka. The Mullawaikal massacre has also had devastating consequences for the Tamils as well as the economy due to the staggering military spending. Demilitarization was welcomed after the war. However, the military presence in the north and east remains very heavy, intruding into civilian life. Enforced disappearances have also been reported as a major issue, before, during, and after the war. This includes the dreaded white van abductions, believed to be sanctioned by the highest levels of government. Land grabs and confiscations since the end of the war have continued at an alarming rate. They are destroying areas of cultural and religious significance to Tamils. Intimidation and persecution through torture, rape, sexual abuse still continues. The Prevention of Terrorism Act is being used to arbitrarily detain Tamils and Muslims for indefinite periods of time. All of these reasons further reiterates the fact that the need for accountability and justice through the International Criminal Court is needed now. This is the focus of the work of Tamil Rights Group. TRG is an international not-for-profit organization established in 2021, and we seek to strengthen the advocacy efforts and transitional justice and universal jurisdiction of Ulam Tamils through leveraging international law, expanding global diplomacy, and defending civil liberties within Sri Lanka. TRG is firmly committed towards the relentless pursuit of justice and accountability for Ulam Tamils using all avenues available under international law and human rights principles. Under our main pillar to leverage international law, we are working to expose the systematic genocide of Ulam Tamils. We want to achieve accountability for human rights violations, war crimes, crimes against humanity by the Sri Lankan state and military. We need to leverage international law because the Sri Lankan military now enjoys impunity and protection from the current government, and they have repeatedly failed to implement domestic accountability mechanisms. In a major move to advance accountability, TRG in November of 2021 submitted an Article 15 communication to the Prosecutor's Office of the International Criminal Courts. Our aim in this submission is to refer atrocity crimes committed against Ulam Tamils and request its chief prosecutor to initiate an investigation. The communication summarizes the pertinent facts related to the crimes and clarifies the legal basis for jurisdiction pursuant to the Rome Statute. David Mattis and Sarah Teach, our senior legal advisors, are here today and will get into the specifics of the Article 15 submission, the importance of a state party referral, and other mechanisms to advance our efforts. In addition to our ICC opinion, at Tamil Rights Group, we are continually requesting the United Nations to appoint a special rapporteur to ensure continued documentation of human rights violations. We are increasing diplomatic pressure on Sri Lanka to ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC to ensure accountability of mass atrocities and alleged genocide. We are supporting the implementation of recommendations of previous investigations on Sri Lanka, particularly the creation of a hybrid special court. And most importantly, we are calling on the United Nations Security Council to hold an urgent debate about the current human rights situation in Sri Lanka and strategies to advance accountability at the international level, including, as necessary, a UN Security Council referral of Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Courts. I now turn it over to David and Sarah to discuss our Article 15 submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Katpana. As Katrina mentioned, next we do have, and I realized I forgot to introduce myself. Good morning, folks. My name is Radhika Sitsbaisan. I'm here as a representative of Association Tourner La Page from France. I am a former member of parliament from Canada and as a human rights activist, global human rights activist, working with Tourner La Page based out of France. Next, we'll have David Matus, the external senior legal advisor from Tamil Rights Group. He's a lawyer and recognized authority on human rights, immigration, and refugee law. He has had a marked impact on the evolution and expansion of these fields in Canada and abroad. David has been a valued advisor and human rights observer for the Canadian government and has been sought out for his expertise by several human rights organizations such as Amnesty International Canada, the Canadian Council for Refugees, and the International Commission of Jurists. I know that my team had even invited him to the Canadian Parliament as an expert witness on multiple occasions. He was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2009. David is also a co-founder of the International Tamil Refugee Assistance Network. David?
Okay, thank you very much. The most recent report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on the situation of human rights in Sri Lanka, released earlier this month, states in paragraph 61, and I'm quoting, "In the absence of credible or effective domestic remedies, there have been some developments at the international level and in member states outside of Sri Lanka to advance accountability. For instance, communications were submitted in October and November 2021 to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court under Article 15 of the Rome Statute, requesting that the prosecutor exercise jurisdiction over crimes under international law in Sri Lanka. While Sri Lanka is not a state party to the Rome Statute, the communications submit that the alleged crimes occurred partially on the territory of states parties." That's the end of the quote. The communication in November to which this paragraph refers comes jointly from the NGO's Tamil Rights Group and the International Tamil Refugee Assistance Network. Sarah Teach, Katpana Najendra, who you just heard from, Sam Ratna, Hannah Taylor, and I were the co-authors of this submission. The report was the result of a UN Human Rights Council resolution to promote accountability in Sri Lanka. The resolution asked the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to present to the Council strategies and options for advancing accountability. One option presented by the report is the joint initiative that the two NGOs have taken to engage the International Criminal Court. Now, the budget and time of the court are limited, and the situations meriting their attention are regrettably all too many. Several of the crimes the court is addressing are ongoing, creating an urgency to the work on these crimes. Asking the court to address any crime against humanity means giving the crime a priority in an overcrowded agenda and expending funds on investigation and prosecution of the crime which could have been expended elsewhere. Priority is deserved for this situation, I would argue. Crimes committed in Sri Lanka against the minority Tamil population during the Civil War for at least three different reasons. One is the gravity of the offenses, and we heard something of that earlier. One measure of the gravity of the crime, so far from the only, is the number of people who have left Sri Lanka because of them, roughly 1 million. The Tamil population in Sri Lanka today is approximately 3 million. So about 1/4 of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka is now outside of Sri Lanka because of the hostile environment they faced in Sri Lanka. A second reason for the priority is the need to explore and make a ruling on a legal issue the situation presents. This referral that has been made to the International Criminal Court relies on a court precedent that Sarah Teach will talk about, the Myanmar, Bangladesh precedent, but goes beyond it to include indirect deportations from Sri Lanka to a state party to the Rome Statute where the victim passes in transit through a state not party to the Rome Statute, as well as direct deportation, which is the Myanmar, Bangladesh precedent, from Sri Lanka directly to a state party to the Rome Statute. Do the crimes against humanity of deportation and persecution connected to that deportation encompass indirect as well as direct deportation? In our view, they do. However, this is a question the International Criminal Court should be asked to answer because of the importance the answer has generally. A third reason for priority is the importance of the message the prosecution of these offenses would give. Investigation, arrest, prosecution, conviction, and sentencing are deterrents against repetition of any crime, not least crimes against humanity. Immunity is a license for further mass atrocities. The International Criminal Court needs to send the message that remaining in power, covering up, denying the crimes, pretending to do something about the accusations but in fact doing nothing, and blaming the victims does not grant immunity. The court needs to communicate that there is no statute of limitation for crimes against humanity, both in law and in fact, that perpetrators will be prosecuted no matter what their efforts to avoid responsibility for their acts, no matter what their current positions of power, and no matter what time has passed since the crimes have occurred. Prosecuting the perpetrators of mass atrocities committed against innocent Tamils in Sri Lanka will send these messages. The crimes committed during and at the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka call out for a remedy. The crimes of Sri Lanka resulted in a massive refugee population spread around the world, many of whom are still not resettled today. There are crimes with a global significance. Locally in Sri Lanka, the perpetrators remain in power. They give immunity themselves, including diplomatic immunity, by appointing perpetrators to diplomatic posts. They prevent meaningful repatriation, reconciliation, truth, and justice. If there is to be justice at all, it must come from outside Sri Lanka. An engaged international instance can show much more clearly and systematically the international dimension of the crimes, their seriousness and global impact, than justice in any one particular country could do. The UN Human Rights Council in Geneva has been actively engaged for years in the events which ended the Civil War, attempting to get a full accounting and justice for the victims. Those efforts have mostly gone nowhere, but have not yet reached a dead end. There's an obvious match between the claim for accountability coming from the Human Rights Council and the availability of accountability through the International Criminal Court. We can get those two pieces of the international human rights system to fit together through the International Criminal Court. The United Nations Human Rights Council, which mandated the report on Sri Lanka just released this month, had in total 51 states which supported the resolution, either by co-sponsoring it or by voting in favor of it, or both. The recent report concluded, as I noted, an absence of credible or effective domestic remedies. Every one of those 51 states who stood behind the resolution on accountability in Sri Lanka, which generated the present report, should now join in a referral of the situation, the report addressed to the International Criminal Court. Their commitment to accountability in Sri Lanka demands no less. At the end of the day, crimes against humanity will be remedied only if humanity takes up the cause of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I will turn the floor over to Sarah Teach, who is the external legal advisor from Tamil Rights Group. Sarah is a Canadian attorney, consultant, and author based in Toronto. She holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Toronto, an MA in counterterrorism and homeland security, and undergraduate degrees in psychology and sociology from McGill University. She's worked on classified projects for the International Criminal Court in The Hague and led a Canadian National Security Working Group delivering policy submissions to the Parliament of Canada. Her current research focuses on international human rights law and national security law and policy. So Sarah, if you continue, please.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. As you have heard, last November, Tamil Rights Group, together with the International Tamil Refugee Assistance Network, submitted an Article 15 communication to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, formally requesting that the prosecutor open a preliminary examination into atrocity crimes committed against the Tamils in Sri Lanka. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has stated now multiple times, the international community is at a turning point with respect to Sri Lanka. There is substantial evidence that atrocity crimes were committed against the Tamils, particularly in the final stages of the decades-long armed conflict that ended in May 2009. And there is no indication that the government of Sri Lanka intends to pursue accountability efforts at home. Evidence of atrocities has been extensively documented by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights investigation on Sri Lanka. They found that Tamils were killed en masse, and that Sri Lankan government officials encouraged hundreds of thousands to seek safety in so-called no-fire zones, only to bomb them. The High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time expressed concern that these bombings were indicative of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Although the armed conflict formally came to an end in May 2009, the atrocities against Tamils did not stop. More than 250,000 civilians were detained in camps where torture and sexual violence was widespread. Homes were confiscated or destroyed. Militarization of the north and east continued, and the refugee crisis has also continues to this day. Meanwhile, the perpetrators have not been brought to justice. On the contrary, the government of Sri Lanka has actively obstructed accountability efforts. Sri Lankan government officials have hindered trials, and they have appointed alleged war criminals and criminals against humanity to key administrative and diplomatic positions within the Sri Lankan government. If Sri Lanka's domestic systems are not going to provide justice and accountability, the international community has to step up. We need to ensure that perpetrators of atrocity crimes are brought to justice and held accountable. One important way to do this is to have the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court open a preliminary examination and ultimately an investigation and prosecutions. There are 3 routes to do this. First, the prosecutor may open a preliminary examination on his own initiative, which may follow an Article 15 communication by civil society like ours. Second, a state party can refer a situation to the court. And third, the UN Security Council can refer a situation. Unless the Security Council route is used, the prosecutor is limited jurisdictionally. He may only investigate crimes that occur on the territory of a state party or crimes committed by state party nationals. Sri Lanka is not a state party to the Rome Statute. This means that without a UN Security Council referral, crimes committed wholly on the territory of Sri Lanka and by Sri Lankan nationals cannot be investigated. This may be one reason why, for many years, the ICC has not been utilized. However, what's changed and what's new in the past few years is that the International Criminal Court issued a ruling in the case of Bangladesh and Myanmar that is now a formidable precedent for our case. That case looked at the mass crimes committed against the Rohingya people in Myanmar that caused them to flee across the border to seek refuge in Bangladesh. Myanmar is not a state party to the Rome Statute, but Bangladesh is a state party. And the court decided that it could exercise jurisdiction specifically over the crimes against humanity of deportation and persecution, because part of the crimes occurred on the territory of a state party, namely Bangladesh. The crime against humanity of deportation can occur as a result of a coercive environment. This is when persons are subject to such a dangerous environment that they are essentially forced to flee for their safety. This is what happened when Rohingya crossed the border and fled to Bangladesh. And this is also what happened when Tamils fled Sri Lanka in droves. Deportation by coercive environment is a type of deportation under the Rome Statute. And the court said that the crime of deportation specifically, by definition, occurs on the territories of more than one state. So in the Myanmar-Bangladesh case, the crime originated in Myanmar, but completed in Bangladesh. And it was on this basis that the court held it could exercise jurisdiction over these crimes. They ruled that it's enough that at least part of the crime occurs on the territory of a state party. And the court applied this rationale to the crime against humanity of persecution as well. In our communication, we presented evidence that the case of Tamils fleeing Sri Lanka is analogous. As in Myanmar, huge numbers of Tamils fled Sri Lanka due to a coercive environment, rife with mass killings, arbitrary detentions, rapes, torture, and more. We filed evidence that this coercive environment led to Tamils feeling like they had no other option but to flee and seek refuge elsewhere. Tamils fled to many countries, including multiple countries that are states parties to the Rome Statute, including Canada, Australia, Germany, France, the UK, and Switzerland. Our argument is that, like the Myanmar case, the crimes occurred in part on the territories of these state parties. Rohingya fled directly across the border from Myanmar to Bangladesh. Our case is a bit different and novel, because while many Tamils did flee directly by boat to Australia, others fled indirectly, with stopovers in third countries that are not states parties to the Rome Statute, like India. Our argument is that these instances of indirect deportations, as well as those of direct deportations, fall within the jurisdiction of the court. We draw on, among other things, domestic refugee law and understandings of asylum-seeking patterns. And for anyone interested in the details of that, our full communication is available online on the TRG website. So going back to the 3 routes I discussed, our communication was a formal request of the prosecutor's office that he open a preliminary examination on his own initiative. But the other 2 routes are important as well because they come with certain procedural and/or jurisdictional advantages. This is why we are now also asking states parties to refer the situation to the court, because a state party referral would expedite the process in various ways. One important way that it would expedite the process is that the prosecutor would not need to seek an authorization from a pretrial chamber to open an investigation. We are also asking states to facilitate a UN Security Council referral, because if that route is used, the court can look at other atrocity crimes beyond just deportation and persecution, including evidence of genocide. These accountability efforts are critical. With justice not being done in Sri Lanka, it is time for international institutions like the International Criminal Court to do what they were set up to do, work to end impunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I now turn the floor over to Nisha Pires, who is a human rights activist based out of France. She is a sworn translator in the courts, again in France, and serves as the General Secretary for the Global Tamil Movement. Nisha will be talking about why the Global Tamil Movement is asking for the referral to the International Criminal Court. Thank you, Nisha.
Thank you, Radhika. So I'll be very brief given the time limitation. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. So why Global Tamil Movement is asking for ICC? So being the Secretary General of Global Tamil Movement, I'm just introducing our views. So Global Tamil Movement is a network of more than 9,700 organizations around the world, including 241 organizations with ECOSOC status, that means economical and social consultative status into the arena of the UN system. With our partner organizations, we continue to call for ICC for last 13 years now. We used to submit many written statements, oral statements, as you may have noticed. We also follow the International Coalition for ICC for last 13 years. We are asking for an international independent investigation and for referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC. So first, we're going to see the failures of the international community regarding Tamils. For the last 13 years, there are any progress regarding accountability against Tamil genocide by Sri Lankan unitary states. Elam Tamils are victims of genocide by Sri Lankan security forces over 7 decades now. Sri Lanka's long-standing history of impunity is a threat to peace in the Indian subcontinent region, as manifested in the ongoing Sri Lanka's calculated actions to destroy the distinct characteristics of the Tamil nation. The colonization of Tamil areas of historical habitations recognized in the Indo-Sri Lankan Accord in order to reduce the Tamil nation to a minority group, persecution of Elam Tamils, along with the destruction of Hindu temples and the installment of Buddhist statues in its place, and demolishing Mulivaikal Memorial at Jaffna University dedicated to war victims, falls within the purview of Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which is action with respect to the threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. So what is now the positions of the Tamils regarding to this? This is why for the last 13 years, the unified position of the Tamils is to refer Sri Lanka to ICC, be it domestic political leaders, religious organizations, civil societies, notably the Association for Relatives of the Enforced Disappearances, like Sabraniaka here present, and the Tamil Diaspora Organization. We all share the same view regarding this. So what is the position of the former High Commissioners of the UN HRC now? It was highlighted that the former United Nations High Commissioners for Human Rights, Madam Nabi Pillai, Mr. Zaid Al-Hussein, Madam Michelle Bachelet, on their successive reports, they have all indeed recognized all patterns of genocide against Elam Tamils, and they have already urged member states to take steps toward the referral of the worsening situation in Sri Lanka to the ICC. And now, what is Global Tamil Movement is asking? We have repeatedly called on the UN to acknowledge that Sri Lanka is an ethnocratic state that will never provide rights or justice for Tamils. The state's refusal to implement even the 13th Amendment, enacted pursuant to the Indo-Sri Lankan Accord in 1987, is a classic example. Even though Tamils all around the world totally reject this 13th Amendment bill, this Human Rights Council urged the Sri Lankan government to implement at least this in 2015 with the 30/1 inefficient resolution. Both the institutions and the polity of Sri Lanka are permeated with entrenched pervasive racism. This is not an opinion, it is a fact. Former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Saeed Al-Hussein, stated in his 2015 report on Sri Lanka that the crimes committed were systematic. Therefore, we call on the core group to look at history and listen carefully to the victims themselves. There is no space for transitional justice in Sri Lanka. There is no time, no space for here. So Tamils are exhausted and deceived. The call of the hour is remedial justice. So we asked the core group countries on Sri Lanka to have a special session on Sri Lanka to look forward to a referral of Sri Lanka to the ICC by Security Council. We asked the core group countries to have next step regarding the Sri Lanka's accountability. Sri Lanka is one of the most militarized country. It is important that the core group countries like United Kingdom and Canada to prosecute individually or collectively and bring an accountability process by legal proceedings before the International Court of Justice under the Convention of the Prevention of and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide against the State of Sri Lanka. We asked the member states of the UN to bring amendments within their countries into the Immunity Acts, Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Acts, so as to include that foreign states are not immune from the jurisdiction of a court in any civil proceedings that relate to international crimes, namely genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. We also asked to bring legal proceedings and universal jurisdiction against political and military leaders accused of international crimes. The combination of international inaction and limited forums to seek accountability has dealt lethal blows to achieving justice for Sri Lankan state crimes, to bring amendments to their domestic laws, removing state sovereign immunity as a defense for civil liability for international crimes in their domestic judicial forums. This would allow the victims themselves to pursue accountability in the domestic judicial forums in many countries where they presently live. Accountability is not only the end, but itself. It is not only the end itself, but it's also an important process. Putting in prison the former President Gotabaya, the former Army Commander Sarath Fonseca, or former President Chandrika will not itself ensure non-recurrence of mass atrocities in the island of Sri Lanka or resolve the Tamil national question. Holding individuals responsible for their crimes is an important first step. Progress on justice and accountability will also contribute to achieving a permanent solution to the Tamil national question. Therefore, our demands to the core group and Human Rights Council members are to the core group countries on the resolution on Sri Lanka to propose another country-specific resolution under Agenda 4. Second one is to refer Sri Lanka to the UN Security Council with recommendation to refer Sri Lanka to the ICC. To ensure non-recurrence of mass atrocities, the victims should be allowed to find a permanent political resolution to the Tamil national question that has plagued Sri Lanka since independence, manifest in lethal racist acts of genocide against Tamils in 1958, in 1977 and 1983, and war crimes, crimes against genocide and genocide against Tamils during the 1983-2009 war and its aftermaths. Specifically, victims should be empowered to participate in finding the political resolution via a referendum conducted under international law space to determine the political future of the Tamils. We also request to the Special Committee on Decolonization to recognize Tamilelam as a non-self-governing territory. A referendum is an appropriate mechanism, not only because the lasting solution requires Tamils' adherence, but also because a referendum provides an important measure of remedial justice. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nisha. And I'd like to pass the floor on over to Mr. Salvaraja Gajendran, who is a member of parliament from Sri Lanka and also serves as the General Secretary of the Tamil National People's Front. Mike, you're on the
Thank you, moderator. I thank Association Tourner La Page for letting me speak on this forum. I deliver this statement on behalf of Honorable Kajendra Kumar Ponnambalam, Member of Parliament and President of Tamil National People's Front. He is absent due to personal reasons. We believe that it is essential regarding for anyone interested in justice and accountability in Sri Lanka. The report should provide to be a key resource for all stakeholders involved in the civil war in Sri Lanka, in a much needed process of introspection and critical reflection. We believe that war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide took place, and the structural genocide is continuing under the jackboot of the Sri Lankan army. We believe, as stated in the OISL report, that due to the horrific level of violations and abuses, patterns of serious and grave international crimes, this Council should refer the Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court. We believe that the current resolution proposed by the core group countries on Sri Lanka will not be effective in ensuring accountability. The manner in which the system of accountability is created will be the test of the credibility of the UNHCR system, UNHRC system, the international community, and the GOSL. The UN Human Rights Council should remain seized of the matter. The resolution that is being considered for the presentation before the current session of the UNHRC should reflect the aspiration of Tamil victims and High Commissioner's successive reports in word and spirit. As Sri Lanka failed to establish a genuine hybrid mechanism within a specific time framework, the UNHRC, other relevant UN organs and member states should initiate necessary steps for a UN Security Council referral to the ICC. Tamils in Sri Lanka are disappointed by the decision of the United Kingdom, United States, Canada and core group countries to conduct the war crime investigation through a domestic mechanism. It is for us crystal clear that such mechanism will not provide justice to the victims. First of all, the justice system and the constitution of Sri Lanka are weak. Justice delayed indicates justice denied. Hence, a Sri Lankan mechanism that meets the international standard in investigating the war crime and proving justice for the victims is purely a method of the international community to turn a blind eye to the victims of Sri Lanka. In addition to this, the responsibility to investigate the war crime is handed over to the perpetrators who were involved in the war and who have committed crimes. For example, Chandrika Kumaratunga is involved in the killing of 650 civilians in Semmani, Jaffna in 1995, when she was the president. Maithripala Srisena was the Deputy Defence Minister when mass killing took place in the last war. Because of above mentioned reasons, we Tamils are rejecting the decision on domestic mechanism and pleading for international mechanism. As means of expressing the rejection of signature campaign was launched all over the countries, and for the last 13 years all Tamil civil societies, Tamil politics are calling for an international accountability mechanism to examine mass atrocities, crimes against humanity, war crimes and crimes of genocide committed during the final stage of war, stage of Sri Lanka's armed conflict. Representatives from the Tamil National Alliance, Tamil National People's Front, religious leaders, civil society representatives, university lecturers, students and local people took part in the campaign like P2P and other protests. Nonetheless, while conducting the protest and the campaign, people faced many difficulties. Through the government changed, the militarization and the surveillance of the TID and CID did not change at all. People who participated in the protest march were photographed by the TIDs. Some of the young participants were constantly under fear during the protest as TID paid special attention on them. Some others were directly threatened by the TIDs and the army on the way back to home. Participants were told that once the TID received command from their superior person, they will kill them. Similarly, the signature campaign was conducted in an open space where more people gather. Even their TID surveillance continued and people involved in the campaign felt threatened. Out of all these difficulties and life-threatening, Tamils initiated the rejection of domestic mechanism because this is a crucial point of Tamil victims. Thus, through this letter, I kindly request the High Commissioner of the Human Rights on behalf of all Tamils to receive the decision, revise the decision on behalf on war crime investigation for the betterment of the Tamil victims. These council members have responsibility to protect Eelam Tamils from ongoing human rights violations and progress justice and accountability for the war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide against Tamils. We thanks Canadian Parliament to recognize May 18 as Commemoration Day of Tamil Genocide. We ask the council members to nominate a special rapporteur for Sri Lanka, to recommend that UN Security Council refer Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court through an urgent debate and at the UN Security Council, to recognize Tamils' right to self-determination, to enable them to live with peace and security in our traditional homeland in the north and east of the island. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Parliament. Next, I'd like to pass the floor to another Member of Parliament from Sri Lanka, Sivanyanam Sridharan, who is a Member of Parliament representing the Tamil National Alliance and the Klinochi District.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you to give me these opportunities. Thank you to invite me for this session. I am here as Member of Parliament for Jaffna Electoral District, including Klinochi District, for last 12 years, and I used to come for Geneva on behalf of Tamils victims for Rise Voice. We are living under single military occupation. We continue to face genocide by Sri Lankan security forces for last 74 years. I want to take the opportunity to make awareness on the use of heavy weapons during the genocidal war against Tamils by Sri Lankan military and paramilitary on Tamils. Sri Lankan security forces and its paramilitary made genocide by killing on enforced disappeared more than 169,000 Tamils in short period of 8 months between October 2008 and May 2009. Unfortunately, this council resolution continued to ignore the Tamil victims in north and east of Sri Lanka, who are victims of genocide, crimes of enforced disappearances by Sri Lankan military and paramilitary groups. This council continue to support the implementation of Office of Missing Person, which not currently and justice process. In order to gather opinions from the public, consultation task force mechanism was established by the then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in 2015 in accordance with the UN Resolution 30-1. Complaints made by the victims in this regard was not taken into consideration. While establishing OMB, there had been neither transparency nor consultation with victims to Tamils. The important section 11A of the OMB Act was revoked due to the pressure given by the JVP, the racist singular political party in the parliament. Section 13(2) of the OMB Act reveals that no room for protection based the findings of the OMB as evidence either in the civil court or in the criminal court. Tamils are protesting for justice for more than 2,000 days. More than 138 parents who were protesting for the justice, along with us, had already died without knowing the fate for their loved ones. In the work of the tail end of the war in the year 2009, believing the fake promise of the Sri Lankan forces, many mothers and wives had handed over their loved ones to the Sri Lankan army. Army commanders who were in charge for the relevant checkpost at the time of surrendering our loved ones should be investigated in order to find out of the whereabouts of the surrendees while they are alive. These army commanders are now being promoted as diplomats and holding high posts in various sectors of the government of Sri Lanka. The culprits should be brought before the International Criminal Court and serve punishment should be imposed. This imposition should be a lesson to those who are intended to commit such an atrocity in the future. As stated on OHCHR successive report, there is no answer, no justice in Tamil's homeland. Families of the disappeared make more than 5 years. Of a roadside protest just a few weeks ago demanding to know the fate of their possibly disappeared loved ones. Many of the families witnessed their relatives being taken into Sri Lankan military custody at the end of the armed conflict, or they were abducted in white vans. As parliamentarian and on behalf of Tamil victims, I urge Human Rights Council members and especially the COPE group countries on Sri Lanka's resolution for last 30 years to refer Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court, appoint a country-specific rapporteur for Sri Lankan under Agenda 4, release a list of surrendees from the final phase of the armed conflict, release the yearly list of detainees under the PTA since 1978. I also urge the General Assembly and Human Rights Council to have a similar special session regarding Ukraine and take immediate action against the Sri Lankan. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Sridharan. And I'm just about to open the floor to anybody who may have questions. I actually have a question. I'm hearing that we have many routes forward. We have the ask to nominate a country-specific rapporteur for Sri Lanka under item 4, prosecutor's office to open an independent investigation, States Party referral to the ICC, Security Council referral to the ICC, calling for a referendum, or the Special Committee on Decolonization to recognize Tamil as a non-self-governing state, and I believe there are probably other routes forward too. When I opened this morning, I said, this is what we have written on the flyer, and thank you for all of you for joining us. I have a question. I have a bone to pick with the flyer itself, because as I understand it, the fourth crime is actually not ethnic cleansing. Because ethnic cleansing is not the actual name of the crime. The fourth crime is aggression, as far as I understand, an attack on one state by another. So Sri Lanka committed that crime against Tamilulam. The president of Sri Lanka recognized Tamilulam as a separate state on multiple occasions. And on the topic of aggression, the UN General Assembly Resolution 3314 states that aggression is, and I quote, without prejudice to questions of recognition, end quote. So this means that even an unrecognized state can suffer aggression by another. So as far as I understand, and I'm looking at David here, because I'm going to throw this question to you, David. As far as I understand, aggression has actually not been tried before a court, at least since World War II, when it was called by a different name. And I think at the Nuremberg trials and Tokyo trials against the Axis generals, this crime was called crimes against the peace, if I recall correctly. Thank you. So how do we go forward? What suggestions might you have for us?
Well, in fact, I do have a suggestion, and I wrote an opinion piece about this in the Globe and Mail, not about Sri Lanka, but about Russia and Ukraine. But the legal pathway would be the same. There is a provision in the Rome Statute now about aggression. It was a subsequent amendment. It wasn't part of the original negotiations. At the time, they weren't quite sure how to define aggression, but finally there was a meeting of the states parties. They defined aggression. It's in the Rome Treaty. And there's separate accession provisions, and we heard from Sarah, Security Council can refer anything. If it's referral by a state party or NGOs, you've got to be a national of a state party, or the crime has to be committed in the territory of a state party. For the crime of aggression, you've got to be a national of a state party. It's not sufficient that the crime was committed in the territory of a state party. But there is a way around that, because here, of course, the state party that committed the crime of aggression is Sri Lanka, and they certainly did not. Well, in fact, the crime of aggression was added to the Rome Treaty after the Civil War ended. But one can argue that it's ongoing, the crime of aggression, but Sri Lanka is unlikely to, right now, to sign that component of the treaty. However, other states can do so, and some states have done so, signed on to that component of the treaty, and then they can enact universal jurisdiction legislation that's coincident with it, and that universal jurisdiction legislation doesn't have to be coincident in terms of its jurisdiction with the Rome Treaty. It can encompass nationals, victims that are nationals of the state that is enacting the legislation. I mean, of course, we've got victims from Sri Lanka that came to many countries afterwards. But we've also got people who were in Sri Lanka at the time of the aggression and were nationals of states parties that could enact this legislation. So forgive me if that seems like a technical and complicated answer, but there is a legal pathway forward if states were to do that. Accede to the Rome statute component on aggression, enact their own universal jurisdiction legislation, identify victims that are their own nationals that were victims of the aggression at the time. Right. The legislation can go back in time. It can be retroactive or retrospective to the time that these offenses existed in international law. And then they could just issue an arrest warrant for people who perpetrated the aggression. I mean, that could be done.
And considering that we have at least 1 million who have fled the state called Sri Lanka because of this aggression against people of the state, unrecognized currently state of Tamalulan, we definitely could have multiple cases to put this forward.
Possible, yes.
Okay. I'll open the floor if there are any questions from the room. Otherwise, I have another as well. Yes. Please, if you would introduce yourself as well, briefly.
Hello. My name is Darak and I'm from Western Sahara. Thank you so much for the presentation. You know that we are facing, and especially as from Western Sahara, we have suffered from several criminal wars and criminal, let's say, treats from other countries. And my question would be to David, can some state parties' efforts to withdraw from the ICC system be considered at the beginning of this court's failure to achieve the goals of which it was established, or its inability to adapt to the international situation and the fluctuation of relations between states? The second question would be how we can adopt very effective policies in order to the accountability of some governments which are committing these criminal actions, especially if we talk about this the case of Tibet. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, in terms of withdrawal, sure, states can withdraw from any treaty, but their obligation that existed at the time that remembers or party to the treaty continues afterwards. So the withdrawal only affects events that occur after the withdrawal, but doesn't doesn't generate an immunity for events that occurred before the withdrawal. How do we make the international system more effective? Well, partly I think we need to give the court more of a budget. It's got a limited budget and can only do so much. But another way is to expand the exercise of universal jurisdiction. I mean, within limits. I mean, it can go, universal jurisdiction can extend too far. We don't want to set up every country in the world as an international court for every other country in the world. So there, which at one time Belgium was doing, and it was just, it didn't make sense. But we can have more of a universal jurisdiction where at least when perpetrators are present in the territory or the victims are national of the jurisdiction which enact a crime, then there could be prosecutions. And there are some states that have that universal jurisdiction, but there could be more. So those are the two main suggestions I would make. I guess there's a third one. Third one is expanding civil liability. There are some jurisdictions which allow a kind of universal jurisdiction for civil liability, but not enough. And so I think, and of course, the advantage of civil liability is that victims can bring the cases to court. With criminal liability, you're dealing with the state bringing the cases to court. So I think it would be useful to expand civil liability regimes.
Thank you, David, and thank you for that important question. Recognizing that we've now reached 11 o'clock and 45 seconds, we will have to end this conversation today. I do want to thank everybody in the room for joining